So according to the calendar, it's almost September, which means it should be the best time of the year for cool season grass. But what happens if the temperatures aren't transitioning, and what happens if you're in a severe drought? Let's talk about this today. So let's talk about what's going on here. We are still in a severe drought. We've had around 2 inches of rain since May, and usually our summer period here is where we get the majority of our decent rain. Hasn't happened this year, and so what's going on behind me is that I have Kentucky bluegrass, which is now in its dormant stage. So what happens in dormancy is the grass plant pretty much just goes brown, it stops growing, and it goes into protective mode to allow itself to sit through all this heat, through all of the lack of water. Now you can't let this go forever, and that's what I've started to do now, is transition into watering it again, because I see the end of the tunnel, I hope, on temperatures being so hot. But look at this week right now. We're in the warmest weather of the season. It's supposed to be 97, 98 today, and it's actually been slightly less humid, which takes more moisture out of the ground, and is really difficult to deal with when we are already in a severe drought. So I had to make a decision here a little while back on what to do with this. I wasn't able to completely keep up with watering. I don't have an irrigation system in the backyard, and that project up there, that little deck that we were working on, kind of took precedent over some other things that were going on. Now there's some of you who probably are going to be freaked out by the way this looks right now and think that there's no possible way it's going to be able to come back this year, and you're going to have a lot of work to do. Well, there is some work to do, and I'm going to talk about that here in a second. Look at the same thing that happened a couple years ago. Exactly the same thing. I let all of this stuff go back here for pretty much the exact same reasons as I did this year. There's just a certain point where you have to decide whether or not you're willing to fork over a fortune of water to put on something, or whether you're just going to let the plant do what it wants to do anyway. But at the end of the fall of that year, this is how things turned out, and this year I have a more aggressive plan to fix this. So you can see here how just a couple hours of shade from this tree makes such a difference in terms of how green this grass will stay and how much it gets through that dormancy. Compare that to just a few feet away there where it's getting full sun morning, afternoon, evening. It's very difficult for that grass to continue to hang on through all of that sunlight all day long. So what you're also going to notice out here is that I have green coming back off of the dormant areas. So there's some areas here that after that watering they're starting to return to what they should. It's going to take some time, and it's also going to probably take some much cooler temperatures for recovery, because it's not only just the water that we need, but we also have to have some cooler temperatures to come back. Because remember, cool season grass needs much lower temperatures for it to be in its prime season. So now, although I think most of the areas will be okay, this area right through here is the absolute worst in terms of, 1, dormancy, but 2, there was some fungus damage that happened in midsummer that I wasn't sure exactly how recovery was going to go with that. And now I can pretty much tell, after I've been putting water on it, that there's a lot of areas where the grass does not look to be standing up again and trying to return. But I have a good feeling that that fungus did some actual damage in terms of actually killing the grass plant in some of these areas. One other thing to show you back here on the area behind my fence line that has not gotten any irrigation on it whatsoever besides rain. I actually posted a picture the other day as well on bluegrass going dormant versus tall fescue and still green at this point. So this tells me right now where my clumping fescue parts are. I have a few of them out in this backyard area. That tells you pretty much the difference there on the extensive root system that this tall fescue has in order to much better withstand the actual drought conditions that are going on right now. It's interesting to see that firsthand right next to each other and have an example to show you there. So what's my plan for fall, and what are the steps here that maybe you want to take as well to get going on this? So the problem that we're having right now is with that heat and the extreme dormancy that's happened in a lot of areas. The question becomes, how are we going to transition that lawn back to a normal type of situation where you can actually get an aerator on it, where you can actually get a dethatcher through it without basically completely tearing up what's here? So if you want to do an overseeding process, basically it's the best way that you can add new fresh seed to a lawn, make it thicker, get some new cultivars in there without removing completely all of this stuff. So that's a full lawn renovation. So I have 2 videos. One goes over all of the overseeding steps from last year. That's a complete guide for you. And then I just did a complete guide on a full lawn renovation over at my neighbor's house. So both of those will tell you the exact steps that you need. But now we're at a conundrum of when can this start because of all this extreme heat and dormancy. So you got a decision to make here on watering your way out of this right now to try to get the lawn back out of dormancy, or waiting for rains to come here in the fall. It sort of depends on what kind of situation you're looking at and how long you think it might be before you really have to have that seed down in order for it to get going before winter comes. So for me, I've started this week to start watering again. Another key factor here is to make sure you understand how much water is actually going down. So with this impact sprinkler that I was using, you would probably assume running it for an hour would be a lot of water coming out. But I actually use one of these right here. They come in a little pack that you can get, so you can set them around various parts of the yard. And it's a little tiny rain gauge that will tell you how much irrigation is coming down, so you can make sure you understand how much water, because a lot of people set their sprinkler, they have no idea how much water is actually coming out, and then they're wondering why they're not getting great results out of it, but there probably was not enough water going down. So this will help you to understand how much water is actually going down. And to give you an exact number of what this lawn needs to come out of dormancy, I can't tell you exactly at this point, because in a severe drought, we're so many inches of rain behind right now that I can't tell you exactly how much this needs in order to get out of that. But I noticed at the end of this week that the forecast is starting to dip more towards 70s, so I have a few chances of rain in there as well. So I'm going to start this process now, hoping that Mother Nature might help out a little bit, give me some rain at the end of the week. And as those temperatures come down, it's going to be a lot easier to hold the moisture in the ground as well. But if you were not going to do any watering, you don't want to move on to the next steps here, which was going to be, for me, dethatching and core aeration. So dethatching, really, I guess I wouldn't call it a true dethatch, because I'm not really dealing with a thatch issue in my lawn. I'm dealing with a lot of dead material that's been there after summer just because of those fungus issues and because of the fact that some of it just happened to die from drought. What I need to do, and I've done this process before, is I go through with my scarifier machine on the swardman and I get rid of all that dead grass and material that's there, and I pick that up and I remove it from the lawn. Now, if you don't have a tool like this, you can use an electric dethatcher. If you have a small yard, you can actually do this with a hand rake as well. But if your lawn's dormant right now, this isn't a process you're really going to want to do, because it's in a stage of being in stress. And if you take that scarifier dethatcher machine right over it and you're dealing with that brown toasty type grass, most likely you're going to do quite a bit more damage than you would like to do. So that's why I'm having to water in order to get this lawn ready for that process. The second process is going to be core aeration. I actually didn't core aerate this lawn last year, but with all these conditions that we've had this year, tough conditions, I would like to do the core aeration process this year. So I'm going to remove all that dead stuff from there. Then I'm going to bring an aeration machine on here and pull some of those cores up to the surface. This year I may try to break up those cores as much as I possibly can back on top of the yard for some top dressing, and then I'm going to lay my seed down on top of that. But after you have that aeration process done, you can leave those cores there and plant seed right on top of them, or you can try to break them up so that there's not these big bumps in the yard. And then you get back to that same thing of watering and the fall plan beyond that. So those are some things you need to think about as soon as the weather starts to break. If you make a decision to water at that point, that would be great. But if you make a decision not to do that, then you might just want to focus on taking care of what's in your yard currently this fall, making sure you have a great fertilizer program going on it so that you can give yourself the best success possible going into next spring. So there's another process at the end of the year called dormant seeding. You can think about putting your seed down right before a snowfall and right before you're going into the winter season, and that seed can kind of go into the ground through the freeze and thaw cycles of our winter, and then it can come up in the spring and give you at least some sort of advantage of not planting the seed directly in the spring and having to go through that process, which I've talked about quite a bit too, which becomes kind of difficult to do in the spring. I do have a bunch of fall program videos from the last couple years if you'd like to get a head start on what's going to be coming after we get the grass seed down, and how I actually pushed my yard from something that looked like this last year to something that looked like this at the end of the fall. So I hope this was helpful today to understand dormancy and what you need to be thinking about getting out of that dormancy and into your fall program. So thanks so much for watching. We'll see you next time.